measureless might, incomparable love, the angels delight to sing from above. Let all of creation delight in your ways. With deep adoration, all sing to your praise. Hosanna, Hosanna, forever we'll worship the King. Hosanna, Hosanna, forever we'll worship the King. Hosanna, Hosanna, forever we'll worship the King. Hosanna, Hosanna, forever we'll worship the King.
When my love to Christ grows weak, when for deeper faith I seek, then in thought I go to thee, Garden of Gethsemane. There I walk amid the shades, while the lingering twilight fades. See that suffering, friendless one, weeping, praying there alone. When my love for man grows weak, when for stronger faith I seek, Hill of Calvary I go, to thy scenes of fear and woe. There behold his agony, suffered on the bitter tree. See his anguish, see his faith, love triumphant still in death. See his anguish, see his faith, love triumphant still in death. Then to life I turn again, learning all the worth of pain, learning all the might that lies in a full self-sacrifice.
Light of the world, you step down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, also highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for our sake. Here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Beauty that made this heart adore you, hope of a life spent with you. Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, so abide with me. Swift to its close, ends out life's little day. Earth's joys grow dim, its glories pass away. Change and decay, all around I see. O thou who changest not, abide with me. I need thy presence every passing hour. What but thy grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like thyself my guide and stay can be? Through cloud and sunshine, oh, abide with me. Hold thou thy cross before my closing eyes. Shine through the gloom and point me to the skies. Heaven's morning breaks and earth's vain shadows flee. In life, in death, O Lord, abide with me. In life, in death, O Lord, abide with me. Above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began. Above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known. above all wealth and treasures of the earth. There's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified, laid behind the stone, you live to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man. You were here before the world began, above all kingdoms, above all thrones, above all wonders the world has ever known, above all wealth and treasures of the earth. There's no way to measure what you're worth. Crucified, laid behind the stone, you live to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all. Crucified, laid behind the stone, you live to die, rejected and alone, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of me above all, like a rose trampled on the ground. You took the fall and thought of
All right, it is about that time. If I could have people make their way to their seats. That includes the people in the back. What? Oh. That's mine, yeah. I've got one. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I think that's theirs. Oh, it's yours. Okay. Yeah, for class, yeah. Yeah. Okay. We are on page 64 in the notebook. Acts chapter 16. I believe we are beginning the Philippian jailer section, if I'm not mistaken. I believe that to be true. Acts 16, we'll probably get some context, but 25. In Philippi. Now, before we begin this, I want you to go all the way back to page 49 or 50. Page 49 or 50. We're going to be on 64 to begin, or when we get into class. But before that, page 49 or 50. Now, I've included two separate charts on page 49 and 50. They're on the same page. In fact, I can just pop it out here real quick. We have a more fancier one, and then on the back we have a more just sort of basic comprehensive. This is the New Testament writings, the timeline when they were written. On the back page in particular, you have the place of writing, and then you have a passage in Acts. The passage in Acts is what was going on when they were written. That's the passage in Acts. This is on page 50 in the notebook. So you can see the dates beginning in the 40s, late 40s, and then, so at this point in the narrative, we're in Philippi, in the second missionary journey. Only 2 books of the New Testament have been written thus far. We have the letter to the Galatians, which was written probably in response to the Jerusalem Council, written from Antioch as they returned from the council in Acts chapter 15. Of course, we have James, who it's probably written from Jerusalem. We don't really know exactly, but Jerusalem makes the most sense. That was probably the earliest written letter of the New Testament. Now we're going to, as we are into the second mission, we're going to begin to see much more of the New Testament being written. And so I'm going to start including, you can go back to, I maybe mark that and go back to page 64-ish. I'm going to start including, actually we're going to go to page 67. I'm going to start including in the related scriptures from page 67 onward, lesson 17 onward. I'm going to start including books that were written during the events that we're talking about. So not yet, but in the second part of the second mission, you'll see 1st and 2nd Thessalonians at the top of page 67. That's probably written from Corinth during this mission trip. And we're going to start including these more as we go through. Now we're getting into the real meat of when the New Testament is being written on a lot, and most of it's being written on these mission journeys. He's going from place to place, and while he's in these places, he is taking the time, mostly Paul, but also Silas and Timothy are doing this too in a lot of places, and different people are being included as sort of co-authors of these books. He's taking time while he's on these mission trips to write these letters to these churches. And what's ended up happening is, and I think we may have mentioned this many moons ago when we started this class, most of the letters of the New Testament are written to churches in response to problems that he hears they're having. Right, so he's going from place to place, and you can see on page, we're jumping all over, I know, but that's okay. We're getting a good flow of Acts here. You can see on page 61, the map of the second mission here, as he's going from place to place to place. In number 13, Thessalonica, he's in Thessalonica in Acts 17:1. And then he continues on to Corinth in chapter 18. And yet he apparently hears that something's going on in Thessalonica that he doesn't like, or that he's not comfortable with. And so while he's in Corinth, he writes the letter to the Thessalonians. So that's why we have 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. He's writing these as he's going on these journeys, as he's going on these trips, to strengthen, to establish, to teach, to continue to support the congregation that he's no longer at, right? So just because he goes from place to place, he's not teaching them everything they need to know in the time that he's there. He can't. He can't teach them everything he needs to know. So these letters are being written to fill in the gaps of the teaching that he's not able to do. And, he's being driven from, what are some reasons why he has to leave places so quickly? What are some things that happen to him? Paul, that is. Yeah, there's mobs, there's people chasing him. In several places, the Jews are going from town to town, sort of chasing after him. One place, he's stoned. So all these things that are happening to him, that's why he's not able to stay in these congregations, stay with these people and teach them all the things they need to know all at once. That's why we have the New Testament, these letters that are being written to complete and fulfill the teaching that the churches need to have. Now, of course, in the Holy Spirit and his providence and wisdom, has set this up in such a way that we have those letters too, right? That's for us, because we don't have the benefit of the in-person teaching, right? We don't have any of that. Like, Paul never came to us because he's, been dead for 2,000. I'll come back to you. He's been dead for 2,000 years. So the Holy Spirit, and you can see the providence of God in this, in the formation of the New Testament, as these letters are being written to address a wide variety of topics, right? You think about all the things that are covered in the New Testament letters. Preserved, gathered, collected over the next few decades as the apostles are still around. These things are gathered and collected and put together and passed from church to church to church. And that's how we end up with so much, as I don't know if you've spent much time studying textual criticism, how we ended up with so much evidence for the text of the New Testament. Thousands and thousands and thousands of manuscripts, ancient manuscripts, because they're copying these things and they're sending it on to other churches. And you can see the hand of God in this as we then have the completed scriptures for us and for Christians of all time. You had a comment, John? Okay. So we come then to Acts chapter 16. That's just sort of a brief summary is what we're going to get into more as we go through. Not yet, but in the next section. So Acts chapter 16, the Philippian jailer. Now, of course, why are Paul and Silas in jail? Does anybody remember? The fortune teller, the spirit of divination. Specifically, Paul cast that spirit out of that lady, that woman, and then the people that owned the slave girl were unhappy. Why? Why were they unhappy about the spirit being cast out? Yep, there went their money, their revenue stream. So they basically form a mob, and they have some mostly false accusations, a little bit true, a little bit false, but mostly false accusations. And so Paul and Silas are put in jail. And we mentioned this last week, I think. It's interesting to note who else is with Paul and Silas on this mission trip. Timothy and Luke, who apparently are not thrown in jail. So they're somehow separated from this. I think Paul and Silas are the only ones involved in the casting out of the spirit. So Luke and Timothy are just sort of hanging out, I guess, in Philippi. John? Yep. And Luke is, as we're going to see through this narrative, the orderly nature of the Acts narrative. And one of the reasons I think Luke and Acts are really the most historically, the way that we think about storytelling in a sequence of events, and maybe I've mentioned this before as we think about the story of Acts. Luke is recording these in a very orderly fashion. He says this, right, an orderly account, so that we can have certainty. So Luke and Timothy are just sort of hanging out, I guess, in Philippi. We're not sure exactly what they're doing, but Paul and Silas are thrown in jail. Let's begin in verse 25. About Acts 16:25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the prisoners were listening to them. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken. And immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's bonds were unfastened. And when the jailer woke and saw that the prison doors were open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." And the jailer called for the lights and rushed in. And trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas, and he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their wounds. And he was baptized at once, he and all his family. Then he brought them up into his house and set food before them, and he rejoiced along with his entire household that he had believed in God. Okay, long story here. Why were they praying and singing hymns? No reason. Just totally random. The text shouldn't even talk about it. It just doesn't matter. Okay, so two things. I don't want to get too far down before we deviate. This is primarily, I think, they're singing and praying, a means of endurance. They're in jail, they're in prison, and the, difficult circumstance. And it's interesting, they're not just in prison, they're in what? Verse 24. The innermost, and what else in verse 24? Yeah, their feet are in stocks. So it's not like they're just sort of into the regular prison. They're minimum. They're not in minimum security, right? They're in the maximum security place. They're even in stocks, and their feet are in chains. So they're singing and praying, I think, primarily because they're in a bad circumstance, and this is how they're going to get through it, right? They're in. What else are they going to do? I mean, they don't sound like they have a phone. Can't browse the internet. So what else are they going to do? I'll come back to you, John. The singing and praying, now to Don's point about a captive audience. It's hard to know because we're not told. I do wonder this. But it's hard to know the motivation, how much of it is motivated in personal encouragement, that is, they're doing it for themselves, versus external, they're doing it for the people in the prison. I don't know. There's no way to know that. It doesn't say that they were preaching. It does say they were singing and praying. I don't know if they were preaching or not, but the singing and praying, to me at least, indicates much more of a personal motivation and endurance and persevering in a difficult circumstance. Now, the benefit is, because of the situation that they're in, and we are told this, right? The other prisoners, what are they doing? And again, what else are they going to do? I mean, it's not like they can't do anything else. They have to listen. I guess they could sort of plug their ears, but, I mean, they're all in jail together. So what else are they going to do? There was a hand up, and then John. So the hand back here. That is true not true. That is written in several of the New Testament letters. For those who didn't hear, wondering if they were happy to be in prison. Several times in the New Testament, the writers say something like, "Count it all joy when you encounter various trials," or that's in James. There's another one that I can't quite, it's on like the tip of my brain. Something about being counted worthy of sharing in the suffering of Christ. I can't remember where that is exactly. That is an idea that is prevalent throughout the New Testament of, hey, we're in jail, but that means we did a good thing. We're on the right track. We're obviously worthy of sharing in the suffering of Christ. So totally different attitude, I think, to the way the world would think about being imprisoned. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Actually, we have an order. You're after John, so we have an order that's coming. I think there's a totally different way of viewing imprisonment that Paul and Silas have to the rest of the people that were in jail there, right? The rest of the people who are in jail, presumably criminals, probably depressed and sad and angry. Meanwhile, here's Paul and Silas, who don't seem to be particularly worried, who are singing along and maybe even presenting an encouraging sort of persona. would have been in stark contrast. And the prisoners, they're listening to them probably thinking, these guys are crazy. What are these guys doing? Like, what? We're in prison, man. Can you be quiet over there? I wonder if they yelled at them across the prison bars. I don't know. It's hard to say. Okay, so John, and then in the back. What was your comment, John? Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And that's, primary Larry and Bud's been doing that for years, the prison ministry. Effective because of the situation. And we're seeing that here in this text, right? The effectiveness of a ministry even in a worldly situation that's very difficult. In the back, do you have a comment? Yeah, and I do wonder about the other. We're not told about the other prisoners in the text. But the two kind of possibilities, these guys are idiots, or I guess really three, maybe being encouraged themselves, but I think curiosity, right? And to Don's point about the captive audience idea, right? What are they presumably singing about? Yeah, they're singing about God, presumably. Maybe some things about what he's done. You think about our songs. What do our songs have? Well, there's some of the songs we sing are about things that God has done. Some of the songs that we sing are about things that we want God to do. Some of them are about instructions. We have songs about, it's like angry words, like is a song that says what to do and not to do. So you think about the content of our songs, even if they weren't explicitly teaching and preaching, there's still informational content in the hymns, right? That's why the words are so important about the things that we sing. So when we think about the prisoners, we're not told they were converted. I imagine some of them probably were. Of course, we just don't know, right? Did I see a hand over here? No. The second question here. So the prison, of course, there's the earthquake. All the prison doors open. Now, probably that indicates that the earthquake is not natural in nature, right? Because all the prison doors open and somehow the prison doesn't collapse. So you think about the physics involved there. Probably not a natural earthquake. Although I guess the odds are, I guess it is technically possible it could have been natural, but I think it's fairly clear that it's not. Why don't they try to escape in this earthquake? Okay, so maybe it's now again, we're sort of having to speculate a bit. Perhaps there's a recognition of an opportunity to teach. So I want to take advantage of this. We're not going to leave. Why else? Yeah, it's not just about Paul and Silas. It's about the reputation, I think, in some sense, the reputation of the church in Philippi, right? Now, the Philippian church is fairly new because we've just converted who so far? That we know of, Lydia and her family. Perhaps there's been more conversions because they've been there several days at this point. So perhaps there's been more conversions since then. Fairly new church. And how is it going to look to the community as a whole This Paul comes into town, Paul and Silas, they come into town, they're teaching this stuff, people are being converted. They cast out this spirit of divination that's been telling everybody's futures, and then they escape jail, and they're on the run. So I think it's not just a matter of Paul and Silas's personal teaching, but thinking about how our actions affect the reputation of the church, right? And you think about what that would have meant if Paul and Silas just vamoose out of there. I think there's a difficulty for the Christians who are left in Philippi for their work and their continued efforts in that place. Don, did you have a comment? Yeah, that's a separate question, and that is an interesting question. Why do the rest of the prisoners not try to escape? Because what does he say, right? Doesn't he say that? It says very specifically in the text, all the doors were opened and everyone's bonds were unfastened. And then Paul says later on, do not harm yourself, for we are all here. That is a little bit harder to explain. We can explain why Paul and Silas didn't escape, and we understand it, I think. But the rest of the prisoners, why they don't escape, I have to imagine at least one or two of them would have taken the opportunity. So why not? Yeah. So it could be, there's a number of ways we can think about this. So Paul and Silas are praying and singing about the goodness of God, singing about his greatness, maybe praying something like, help us endure this, or think about what we pray, please. Maybe they're just praying the Lord's Prayer, deliver us from evil. And then this happens, this earthquake, and all the bars are open, and the building doesn't collapse. If you're the prisoners who have been listening to this singing and praying for the last however long, maybe you're interested in knowing, hey, what's going on here? What's happening here? What about these guys? It's just there's a lot of obviously supernatural things that are going on here. Ultimately to the benefit of the Philippian jailer, right? Why was he going to kill himself? I'll come back to you, John. He'd be in big trouble. He'd be in enough trouble, obviously, to die, right? The idea of that's a bad way of starting that sentence. The jailer responsible for the prisoners, if they all escape, then it probably is the case that he's going to have to die anyway. He's going to be put to death. Maybe in a way that he doesn't, maybe there's a lot of torture involved in that. Maybe there would have been blowback on his family. We just don't know enough, right, about it necessarily. But obviously the jailer viewed death as a better alternative to whatever's going to happen to him if these prisoners escape, which says a lot about what's going to happen to him if the prisoners escape. John? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. There's some interesting sequencing going on in this story. So the jailer comes to them. All of them are still there. The jailer's first question is obviously what? Yeah, what must I do to be saved? How would he know to ask that? I think there's two possibilities. He either knows it from the singing and the praying, possibly, or it's possible, again, Paul and Silas have been there several days at this point. He's heard teaching previously, right? They've been, however they've been doing it, they've been in the synagogue, maybe in the streets, just, the preaching that's been going on. Maybe he's heard it already. Maybe, obviously, Paul and Silas are not unknown in the city, right? Because it's a mob that was formed. So maybe he knows about what's been going on and sees this happen and is very curious about it. Now he wants to know because he believes in the power of God because of what's happened there. So a lot of things that might have been going on in his head. But ultimately, I think this is a classic example of putting yourself in an opportunity to, how do I say this? Paul and Silas took advantage of every opportunity they had to put themselves in a position where they could be the most effective. At each juncture in the story, from the spirited divination, who they put up with for many days, right? I think it's what it says. Didn't we read that last week? Yeah, she kept doing this for many days in verse 18. They're putting up with that, again, I think, for so long because they don't want this conflict to happen. They want to put themselves in a position to succeed in evangelism. So finally, it becomes too much. She's distracting from the evangelism. He casts the spirit out. And then in prison, they're taking advantage of the opportunity with singing and praying. And this, what else are the prisoners going to do? They're not going to do anything. They're just stuck there with them. So let's sing and pray a bit. And then, I'll come back to you. And then they don't escape. They take advantage of that opportunity. Hey, this is maybe an opportunity that we could talk to the jailer, so we're not going to escape right now. And now here the jailer is asking them, and they, of course, take advantage of this opportunity to do some teaching here that needs to be taught. And I think the lesson is we need to be living a life in such a way that we are making it easiest on ourselves to take advantage of opportunities to teach. That means that we're not going to be engaging in certain things. And you think about the way that all the different things that God commands us to do and not to do. And sometimes I think we have a hard time understanding why. Why did God forbid this? Why does God want us to do this? I think a lot of it does come down to God wants you to be able to affect people at any time, whenever they're ready to hear the message. How you live on a day-to-day basis is going to determine your effectiveness in the moment of teaching. What kind of things you've been doing and what kind of person you are, what kind of things people know about you. This is in our relationships at work and our relationships with friends and family. And in each juncture, thinking about how this is going to affect my Christian influence. That's what they do over and over and over and over and over. And I think we need to be very conscious about that in our own lives. Each moment, what am I doing that's going to affect if so-and-so that I'm with right now, maybe they're not ready to hear the message now, but if they're ready to hear next week, how is my behavior now going to affect my teaching of them next week? I think we need to be more conscious about that. Carl, you had a hand up. Yeah, and you think about their, I don't know, superstitious is not the right word, spiritual nature, the way that they worshiped a pantheon of gods. Here's been an example, and this is basically what Carl's saying, here's been an example that the people that these guys have been praying to, this God does stuff, right? So let's stick around and see what's going on. Now, I want to talk very briefly. Did the jailer illegally remove them from prison? Because who are they teaching of the jailer's people? He and all his household, which means what? Presumably he's at the jailer's house, right, to teach the jailer's household. Or I guess alternatively, the jailer could have just brought all his household to the jail. But the sequencing's a little bit weird here in that they don't leave when the prison doors are open and the earthquake happens and nobody leaves yet. And then verse 30 first. Verse 30, then he brought them out and said, sirs, what must I do to be saved? And then verse 32, they spoke the word of the Lord to him to all who were in his house. And he took them the same hour of the night and washed their wounds, and he was baptized at once. So obviously he is, and then verse 34, he brought them up into his house. So this jailer, weird thing that's going on here, the jailer is so worried about the prisoners escaping that he's really ready to kill himself. And then this happens and he takes the prisoners out of jail anyway. He takes them back to his house. The whole thing's very bizarre. And then presumably, I see a couple of hands. We'll get back to, I'll call on you in just a minute. This is all happening at night. And the way that the story flows in verse 35, which we'll read in just a minute, the magistrates come back to the police, or the magistrates come back to the jail. It's pretty apparent that the jailer has taken them from the jail to his house. They've taught his house, he's fed them, cleaned their wounds, and then brings them back to jail before morning. This is all happening in the space of, 4 or 5 hours maybe. Well, it was at midnight, right? Wasn't the earthquake at midnight? About midnight they were singing and praying, and suddenly there was a great earthquake. Yeah. So this is all happening in the space of, 4 or 5 hours, before sunrise, I guess. That the jailer takes them, all this happens, and then they come back. And it's interesting they come back. Obviously, they come back to the jail, which we'll read in just a minute. Again, opportunity to teach here, but hey, we need to get back there before anybody knows we're gone. That is kind of what's happening. So I saw like several hands over here. Yeah. That's true. It's possible the jailer lives maybe he lives, maybe not in the prison compound, but right by the prison. So it's obviously not very far to go. Carl, did you have your hand up? Yeah. 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 Yeah, he obviously had some measure of, what about the other guards? They see the jailer taking these prisoners out, and he's like, are you allowed to do that? Obviously, the jailer had some amount of authority, but it's interesting he does bring them back before the end or before the next day. John? That's right. This whole account with the jailer is a story that probably would have spread fairly quickly throughout Philippi. So you think about the city of Philippi. Okay, well, we've already had some teaching. There's already been a mob surrounding Paul and Silas because of the spirit of divination. And then this thing happens with a jail. Of course, the earthquake, we don't know. Probably not a local, I don't know. It's a supernatural earthquake. Maybe it was just localized to the jail. Did the whole town feel it? Who knows? But this story, hey, this happened at the jail. Did you hear about the earthquake at the jail and nobody escaped? Did you hear about the story of the jail? The jailer, now they're all part of this weird group that this guy started. This would have spread throughout town. It definitely would have done that. Now, we come to the next day, verse 35. When it was day, the magistrate sent the police saying, let these men go. This is Paul and Silas, right? The jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, "The magistrate is sent to let you go." Why are they being freed? Yeah, and there's two things. There's the Roman citizenship, but also, as we looked at last week, the accusations are just false, right? They're not, the accusations, what were the accusations? Let's go back to verse 20. These men are Jews and are disturbing our city, advocating customs that are not lawful for us Romans to accept or practice. Well, that's just false, right? So presumably some investigation's gone on in the night, but also the Roman citizenship. Let's read that. Let these men go, verse 36. The jailer reported these words to Paul, saying, "The magistrates have sent to let you go. Therefore come out and go in peace." And Paul said to them, "They have beaten us publicly, uncondemned, men who are Roman citizens, and have thrown us into prison. And do they now throw us out secretly? No, let them come themselves and take us out." The police reported these words to the magistrates, and they were afraid when they heard that they were Roman citizens. So presumably they didn't know up until now. So they're not being released because of Roman citizenship. I think some investigation's gone on about the accusations. They've realized the accusations are false. But now they've heard, hey, we're Roman citizens, and now they're afraid. They were afraid when they heard they were Roman citizens, so they came and apologized to them. And they took them out and asked them to leave the city. So they went out of the prison and visited Lydia. And when they had seen the brothers, this would be other people that have been converted, presumably, right? They encouraged them and departed. Why did Paul insist on making a scene? Yeah, there's a couple of things to think about here. Presumably, they did not do due diligence. They just didn't, right? The magistrates clearly did not do their due diligence. That's what Paul says, right? You have beaten us uncondemned. Uncondemned meaning what? They haven't gone through the courts. They haven't had a trial. They haven't had any sort of regular legal process. There was just a mob. They threw them in jail. Okay, so one, they're not going through the process they should have, which means maybe that's happening to other people too, and we're sort of confronting that. But again, the big thing, I think, is the church's reputation here. We've been thrown in jail after we've been preaching, and again, they're not saying this, but you can see the undercurrent here. We've been preaching for the last however many days in Philippi. Now we've been thrown in jail, and Paul, I think, does not want that to end up going poorly for the church later on. So, no, you magistrates, you did not go through due process. You did not do what you should have done. We were falsely accused. You can't just quietly sweep this under the rug. Everybody needs to know about this. We were wrongly accused. We're Roman citizens. You did not do the right thing. And this is, I think, again, going to affect the church as things continue in Philippi. Now, the theme of this, as you can tell, the theme of this section of the text is thinking about the work of the church and how we affect the work of the church in the church's reputation. And here, confrontation is what's needed. It's not always the case that we just sort of let things go. And there's an interesting sort of undercurrent in this story in particular about when it's worth it to confront. The spirit of divination, that lady, we don't have her name, do we? I keep calling her that lady. I don't think we have her name. No, we don't have her name. It was just a slave girl. That slave girl followed them for many days, and Paul put up with it until it was worth the confrontation, when it started to detract from the work of the church. Here, again, could have just left quietly and been done with it, just sort of gone on his way. But obviously, Paul feels that the confrontation is worth it here to make sure that everybody knows we shouldn't have been put in prison. We shouldn't have been put in prison. And now the whole city's going to know because the magistrates have to come out publicly and make an apology. What does it say? Let's see here. Verse 39, they came and apologized and took them out and asked them to leave the city. Now, why would they ask them to leave the city? Yeah, you're causing a bunch of unrest. Even if you didn't do anything wrong, you're causing a bunch of unrest in our town. Please leave. Now, they don't do it by force, obviously. They're not like throwing them in jail or anything. Yeah, and as long as they stay, it's this public reminder for everybody that maybe there's some corruption going on. So at the end of the day, I think we're seeing in Philippi a couple of interesting lessons. One is putting ourselves in a position to take advantage of teaching opportunities, which is what they do in jail, right? You're idle in jail. What are you going to do? Well, you can just twiddle your thumbs, or you can be an example and encouragement, sing and pray and take advantage of that. Then the jailer comes along. I could go free, or I could stay and maybe teach this jailer. Now, a thing that we don't know, and I always wonder, the thing that we don't know in this story and many other stories, how much of this is Paul and Silas making these decisions, and how much of this is the Spirit telling them, right? There's no way we could ever know that. But I do wonder in times like this, if you're Paul and Silas and you've been praying and singing, you've been put in jail falsely, and suddenly all the prison doors open because of an earthquake, it is not unreasonable to assume that this is God saying, get out of here. And in fact, that's already happened in Acts. When did that happen already? Didn't that happen to Peter? Yeah. Peter was put in jail, and then the angel came, and it's so interesting in that story. He kicks him in the side to wake him up, and then he opens the prison door, and Peter just walks free. So it's not unreasonable to assume, if you're Paul and Silas, oh, this is our ticket out of here, let's get out of here. But they stay, and I do wonder if maybe the Spirit told them, hey, stay here, there's going to be an opportunity here. Or maybe they just knew that there would be an opportunity. It's hard to know one way or the other exactly. Larry? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, maybe the default position is, and this is actually probably a good thing to do just in general, the default position is I'm going to follow the rules unless maybe God tells me not to, right? Which is what the angel did. The angel told him, hey, let's get out of here. So then that's what he did. Steve and then John. Yeah, and the idea of just sitting back and taking it, twice in this story, Paul does not do that, right? He does it with the spirit of divination that's following around. He finally does not just take it anymore and does something about it. And then, of course, the thing of being imprisoned, right, and being released. And this is a matter of that big D word that's hard to do, right, discernment. Because it's hard in our lives. This may be, I don't know if it's the hardest thing, but it's one of the hardest things of being a Christian, is to know when to do which. When do I turn the other cheek, as Jesus would say, and I just sort of move on? When do I do that? And when do I do what Paul's doing and be more confrontational about it? When do I do either one? It's really difficult to know sometimes, isn't it? I would encourage you, because I'm sure that you're facing some dilemma of that nature in your life, unless I guess you're just a hermit living out in the woods. I would encourage you to seek counsel from other Christians about that. One of the things that, of course, we don't have that Paul had is direct inspiration, right? Paul just had it. He just was an apostle, and the Spirit was very clearly doing stuff with him that he doesn't do with us. So for us, we're thinking about how do we make that decision. I would encourage you very strongly to seek counsel from other Christians in that. You have maybe some difficulty, you don't know quite what to do. Well, let's talk about it. It could be the elders, it could be somebody else in the church who's a spiritual mentor to you, or don't just we don't have to just, I guess we do sometimes, but a lot of times we don't have to just sort of figure it out on our own. We can ask for help, right, and figure stuff out. So, John, you had a comment? I think that's our time. Is that second bell? Oh, okay. So we'll pick up whatever text that was. Acts 17. Are we in 17 now? Yeah, we'll pick up in Acts 17 next week. Thanks for being here. We will pick up there next week. We'll take a 15-minute break. I see some visitors, and then we'll have worship.